Let me start with a moment you already know. You're on your phone staring at a message you haven't answered. It's simple. Dinner, Thursday, and your thumb hovers over the keyboard like it suddenly forgot the alphabet. 2 weeks ago, you would have replied in 30 seconds with 3 exclamation points and a bad joke. Today, you think, I'll get to it later. Later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes silence. Across town, she notices the quiet, not all at once. These things never arrive with a siren. They come like a dimmer switch. Your good morning text became, hey. The double tap on her story replaced actual curiosity. Plans shifted from Friday toilets. See, and even your hugs changed temperature by a few degrees. She can't measure that on a thermometer, but her body does. The nervous system is exquisitely honest. People think the biggest betrayals are dramatic. The screaming match, the slammed door. Most endings start so softly you could miss them. A late reply, a laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. The way you sit next to Tasamian and angle your knees a few inches away. When a woman realizes you've lost interest, she doesn't usually announce it. She tests the floorboards. She asks a small question. She watches what you do with a simple truth. I still care. Do you? And this is where philosophy meets psychology. Stoicism says focus on what you can control. Your actions, your words, your character. Attachment science says we seek connection. And when connection feels threatened, we protest or we protect. Put them together and you get a simple equation. When you grow vague, she grows vigilant. When you grow consistent, she can relax. I've seen this play out in every configuration. In new dating, long-term relationships, situationships with the capitals, step turn is ancient. The tools are modern, and the choice is always the same. Honesty now or damage later. So today, let's walk through what actually happens inside her. Mind and body when she senses you're slipping. The 5 most common reactions you'll see on the surface. And what to do on both sides if you want either a clean ending or a real reset. This isn't about blame. It's about clarity. Because clarity is kind, and kindness and love is the only status worth having. There's a pattern you'll see over and over again in relationships, though most people don't have the language for it. It begins in a quiet moment. Maybe when one person stops replying as quickly, when their tone shifts from warm to neutral, when affection feels just a little thinner than before, the other person notices because even if they don't say anything out loud, their nervous system has already clocked the difference. The body knows. And so without fully deciding to, they start to reach for the connection. At first, it's subtle, almost tender, a little joke, a quick text, a question. Hey, are we still good for Thursday? These are not manipulations. They're not demands. They're what psychologists call bids for connection. I like to think of them as protest bids, not because they're aggressive, but because they're a protest against the silence, against the uncertainty, against the first emotional shift. She feels suspicion that someone they care about might be slowly retreating. Think about what happens in those early moments. She notices your attention has shifted and she wants to bridge the gap, so she reaches toward you. The good morning text you didn't send, she sends one. The plan you didn't confirm, she brings it up. The tone that feels cooler. She responds with warmth. That's separatist. Not anger, but effort. A reaching out in a hope that you'll reach back. What many people misunderstand is that these bids are actually a sign of investment. They mean she still cares. They mean she hasn't given up yet. When someone protests your silence, it's because they're still trying to preserve the bond. The danger comes when those bids are met with more distance, more vagueness, or worse, dismissal. Because if the protest doesn't work, the nervous system doesn't just keep protesting forever. It recalibrates. It starts to protect. And this is the pivot point. The turning of the tide after protest comes distance at first. She's still leaning toward you. She's still saying, hey, I miss you, or what happened to our Friday nights? But if that effort is ignored, minimized, or brushed off, eventually she realizes the reaching isn't being matched, and no one can keep extending them into a void without something breaking. So she begins to lean back. Maybe she doesn't even do it on purpose. Maybe she just feels tired of sending messages that get one-word replies. Maybe she feels a little embarrassed for caring more than she thinks you do. Or maybe she simply decides to stop, twisting herself into knots, trying to reignite a spark that you seem uninterested in feeding. This distance is often misunderstood too. From the outside, it can look cold, detached, like she suddenly doesn't care. But if you zoom out, you see it's a survival strategy. The nervous system can only handle so much it can decipher. It protects itself. If reaching toward you means getting rejected or worse, ignored, it's safer to stop reaching at all. I've sat with so many people in my office who describe this dance, the initial reaching out, the small protests, the hopeful bids, and then the moment of resignation. The moment when they stopped asking, stopped texting, stopped trying. Not because they didn't want the relationship, but because they couldn't keep bleeding hope into something that no longer felt reciprocal. And here's the paradox. Often, the person who withdrew first, the one who grew distant, interprets her protest bids as too much. She's needy, she's pressuring, she's creating drama. But if you look closer, you see those bits of the purest expression of care. She is saying in her own way, I want this. Please reassure me that you're still here. What gets labeled as neediness is almost always someone's nervous system asking, am I safe with you? When that question is answered with silence, the protest stops. Not because she's suddenly fine, but because she knows the answer now. She knows she's not safe, not chosen, not prioritized. And so she creates distance to sue herself, to hold her dignity intact, to stop the cycle of hope and disappointment. The tragedy is that many men misread this too. When she stops reaching out, he might think, finally, no more pressure, or she must be fine now. What he doesn't realize is that the relationship is already on life support. Silence doesn't mean everything is okay. Silence often means the funeral has already begun. There's something profoundly human about this sequence, protest then distance. It's the nervous system's way of protecting us from prolonged uncertainty. We can tolerate ambiguity for only so long before we choose clarity, even if the clarity hurts. Reaching out is vulnerable. Withdrawing is protective. Together, they form a rhythm that almost every relationship at some point will experience. And the way we respond in those moments matters more than almost anything else. When someone is in her silent testing phase, protest phase, when they're reaching toward you, checking in, asking questions, it's easy to feel defensive, to interpret their effort as criticism. But if you pause and see it differently as a bid for reassurance, as an expression of care, you realize you're being handed an opportunity to step back in, to repair, to reassure, to say, I see you. I hear you. I'm here. That's all most people really want. If instead you dismiss their bits, roll your eyes, pull further away, then you accelerate the shift to distance. You send the message, even if unintentionally, that the relationship isn't worth the energy. And once someone stops protesting, once they've accepted the distance, it's far harder to rebuild because they've learned not to hope anymore. I think about a couple I once saw. They've been together for 5 years, and she sat on my couch and said, for the first 2 years, I was always the one reaching out. I would ask, when will I see you? Can we plan a trip? Do you still love me? And he would always say, you're too much. Why can't you just relax? Her voice cracked when she said, and then one day I just stopped asking. I stopped fighting for you. And I thought that meant I was finally content. But the truth was that was the day I started to leave him in my mind. That's the danger of us understanding the sequence. Protest bids aren't annoying habits. They're warning signals. They tell you that someone cares enough to fight for the bond. When those stop, it doesn't mean things are better. It means things are almost over. And if you're the one on the other side, if you're the one protesting, it's important to recognize what's happening inside you too. Your reaching out isn't weakness, Dot. It isn't desperation. It's the most natural human reflex in the world toward connection when it feels threatened. But there comes a point where self-respect requires you to step back to honor your own dignity by no longer begging for breadcrumbs. That step back, the distance isn't a failure. It's wisdom. It's your nervous system protecting you from prolonged uncertainty. What makes relationships thrive isn't the absence of protest bids. It's how those bids are answered. If you can meet them with reassurance rather than defensiveness, with clarity rather than avoidance, you create safety. And safety is what allows love to grow. If you ignore or dismiss them, you create distance. And once distance settles in, you're no longer in a relationship. You're in a polity arrangement between two people who have stopped reaching for each other. So the question to ask isn't why is she protesting? The question is, what does her protest tell me about what she needs? And am I willing to provide it? And if the answer is no, if you're not willing or able, then the kindest thing you can do is tell the truth. End it cleanly instead of dragging someone through the slow death of unacknowledged distance. Protest bids first, then distance. It's the oldest story in relationships. It's also the most avoidable tragedy because every protest is really just an invitation to notice, to reassure, touch use, and every distance is really just a final protection, a way of saying, I loved you, enough to fight for us. I respect myself enough to stop fighting alone. If you remember nothing else, remember this. When an protest, it means they still believe in the connection. When they stop, it means they've already begun to let go. And that space between those two moments, the space where you get to decide whether you'll step in or step away, that's where the entire story of the relationship is written. Ambiguity is one of those experiences that looks harmless on the surface, but gnaws at people from the inside. It rarely arrives with a loud announcement. It sneaks in. You go from someone's steady good morning text to a slower response, from Friday nights together to let's play it by ear, from plans with certainty to plans that dissolve at the last minute. None of it is definitive. None of it is catastrophic. And that's exactly what makes it so unsettling. Because when you know someone isn't interested, painful as it is, at least you know. But when you don't know, when you're left in limbo, that's when the mind starts its restless spinning. That's when the body stays on edge, scanning for signals. That's when people we test not because we're manipulative, we test because ambiguity is unbearable. The human nervous system, when she starts seeking validation elsewhere, is not designed to thrive in uncertainty. We crave clarity the way. We crave oxygen. So when clarity is absent, we create little experiments to try to bring it back. Think about how it shows up in relationships. She feels you pulling away, but not enough to call it an ending. Your texts still come, but less often. You still show up, but with less enthusiasm. You say you're busy, but busy can mean 100 things. So she tries to figure it out without having to ask directly because asking directly feels terrifying. What if things were as worse than the uncertainty? So instead, she tests. She waits a little longer to respond just to see what you'll do. She cancels a plan lightly just to notice whether you fight for it. She flirts casually in a social setting, not because she's disloyal, but because she wants to know whether you care. Enough to show it. These aren't games in the cruel sense. They're data gathering missions. They're the nervous system's way of saying, give me evidence. Show 'em what's true. Ambiguity always creates these little experiments because the mind is wired to reduce uncertainty. And here's where so many couples get stuck. The one who is withdrawing feels suffocated by the testing. Why is she acting distant? Why is she playing games? Why is she trying to make me jealous? But if you zoom out, you see that her testing is not the problem. The ambiguity is the problem. The testing is just the symptom. It's like a smoke alarm going off in your house. You can complain about the noise, or you can realize it's alerting you to a fire. The fire here is the vagueness, the not knowing where you stand, the lack of clear signals. The alarm is the testing, and what happens when ambiguity lingers too long is that both people start misinterpreting everything. She thinks if he wanted me, he would make it clear. He thinks if she trusted me, she wouldn't keep testing me. They both start responding to each other's defenses instead of each other's needs. And before long, what could have been clarified in one honest conversation turns into weeks or months of silent resentment. I've seen people waste entire chapters of their lives in this dance. They spend months half in and half out, stuck in a loop of mixed signals and silent experiments. She stops texting to see if he'll notice. He notices, but instead of reaching out, he mirrors her silence to see if she'd double back. She interprets his silence as disinterest. He interprets her withdrawal as relief. And by the time Onion says anything real, the relationship is already hollow. Why do we do this? Because ambiguity feels safer than rejection. To say, I don't feel the same anymore, requires courage. To say, I'm not sure if this is working for me, requires vulnerability. Ambiguity lets us avoid that risk. We tell ourselves it's kinder. We tell ourselves it's gentler, but really it's self-P protection dressed up as consideration. And the ghost is that the other person ends up living in constant anxiety, forced to test and decode instead of being able to trust. The irony is that the testing rarely produces the clarity it's searching for, because when she holds back to see if he'll chase, she still doesn't know the truth. Was he actually busy? Was he distracted? Was he hoping she would step in? Ambiguity means every test has multiple interpretations, which just breeds more testing. What people long for in the end is not perfection. It's not constant reassurance or grand gestures. It's clarity. Tell me where you stand, even if it hurts. Tell me what you want, even if it's not me. Tell me the truth so I don't have to keep inventing it in my head. Because when you're on the receiving end of ambiguity, your mind doesn't rest. It writes stories. It fills in blanks. It rehearses every possible version of the truth. And those stories often hurt worse than reality would. The latter, at least, become proof of abandonment. The short answers become proof of rejection. The canceled plans become proof of betrayal. And soon you're reacting not just to the relationship in front of you, but to the one you've imagined behind the curtain. There's a story I remember from a client who said, it's been a year testing him. I would stop initiating just to see if he noticed that sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. I kept telling myself maybe he was just fussy, maybe he just wasn't expressive. But the truth was, if someone wants to show up, they will. And all of my testing was just me trying to avoid the truth I already knew. That's what ambiguity does. It delays the inevitable. It turns a clean truth into a slow drip of confusion. It keeps people in relationships that should have ended or ends. Relationships that might have thrived if only someone had been brave enough to clarify. Testing is not the problem. It's the smoke alarm. The problem is the silence, the vagueness, the let's see that keeps people suspended in uncertainty. So what does it look like to respond differently? It looks like choosing clarity over comfort. It looks like saying, I like signs of hidden frustration and confusion you, but I don't want the same kind of relationship you're looking for. Or I'm interested and I want to show up more consistently. Here's how. It looks like ending the experiment before it starts by removing the ambiguity. And yes, clarity might sting in the short term. Yes, rejection hurts, but ambiguity corrodes. It eats away at self-worth. It turns loving people into detectives, constantly decoding someone else's silence. It makes them doubt not just the relationship, but their own judgment. Was I too much? Was I imagining it? Did I miss a sign? That kind of doubt lingers long after the relationship itself ends. So, if you care about someone, whether you want to continue with them or not, the kindest thing you can offer is clarity, not mixed signals, not half-hearted promises, not breadcrumbs that keep them guessing, just the truth spoken plain lips. People can handle pain. What breaks them is the not knowing. Ambiguity creates testing. Testing creates distance. Distance creates endings that could have been avoided or at least handled with dignity. And dignity is really what people are asking for when they test, when they question. They're saying, please don't make me beg for the truth. Please don't make me find out by accident. Please respect me enough to be clear. Relationships are fragile enough without the added weight of ambiguity. We already live in a world that asks. You still tolerate so much uncertainty about work, about health, about the future. Love should be the place where clarity is abundant. Where someone says, here I am, here's what I want, here's what I can give. And if what they want isn't you, or what they can give isn't enough, at least you can grieve the reality instead of testing for a fantasy. When someone feels you slipping, they will test. Not because they want to play games, but because they need to know if they still matter. If you don't want to be tested, the answer isn't to scold them. The answer is to remove the ambiguity, to either step closer or step away, to either say yes with your whole self or no with your whole self. Anything in between just breeds experiments that never end, alarms that never quiet, questions that never find answers. Ambiguity is the cruelty. Testing is the symptom, and clarity, even when it stings, is the only real kindness. Two people can experience the same moment, the same silence, the same shift in tone, and walk away with entirely different interpretations. That's what makes relationships so complicated. Because what feels like no big deal to one person can feel like an earthquake to another. And the difference isn't always about the situation itself. It's about how each office is wired to respond to closeness, to distance, to the tiny signs that someone might be slipping away. For some, the slightest shift in attention feels catastrophic. You don't answer their text right away and their mind races. What did I do? Did I say something wrong? Are they losing interest? They scroll back through the last conversation, analyzing every word. They write the story in their heads 5 different ways. They feel compelled to fix it by reaching out again, by asking for reassurance, by trying to close the gap. For others, the same silence feels like a green light to retreat. They notice you pulling away, and instead of running after you, they tell themselves, fine, I didn't need this anyway. They pull back too. They cancel plans, immerse themselves in work, surround themselves with distractions. They act as if they don't care, even when inside they might care deeply. And then there are those who seem to ride the middle tolerate, a little uncertainty without spitting out or shutting down, able to give space without panicking, able to come close without feeling smothered. These differences can make or break the way two people navigate conflict. Imagine, one person feels you losing interest and responds with urgency, calling, texting, asking to talk. Their instinct is to move closer to solve the problem immediately. But if the other person is wired to retreat when things feel tense, that urgency can feel overwhelming. They back away further, which only intensifies the other person's fear, which in turn makes them reach out even more. You can see how quickly the cycle escalates. One person chasing, the other fleeing, both misinterpreting the other's intentions. I remember a woman who once told me about the night her boyfriend didn't answer her call. It was one missed call, she said, but I couldn't breathe. I was convinced something was wrong, or worse of it, he was done with me. I called 3 more times, then sent a text saying, I just need to know you're okay. When Heaven only responded hours later, he said he'd just been at dinner with friends and didn't want to be on his phone. She shut it off in the moment, but inside she felt ashamed. Ashamed of how quickly her anxiety had flooded her. Ashamed of how desperate she thought she must have seemed. Now, contrast that with another story. A man whose girlfriend started emotional withdrawal when she stops giving effort canceling their regular dates. Showing up less, answering later. I noticed, Hesed, but I didn't say anything. I figured if she wanted to see me, she would. So I stopped asking too. I started spending more time at work with my buddies, at the gym. I told myself I didn't care. But really, I cared a lot. I just didn't know how to show it without feeling like I was begging. These 2 people are having parallel experience, but their reactions look almost opposite. One leans in harder, the other leans back. Both are trying to protect themselves from the same thing, the terror of being unwanted. One thinks closeness will keep them safe. The other thinks distance will neither is wrong. They're just wired differently. And when these 2 types end up together, you can imagine the friction. The person who seeks reassurance feels like they're always chasing. The person who needs space feels like they're always being chased. Both start to resent the other. The anxious one thinks, why am I the only one holding this together? The avoidant one thinks, why can't you just relax and let things be? And the truth is, both are acting from the same wound, but in opposite directions. It's not just about fear, though. It's also about stories we've carried since childhood, often without realizing it. If you grew up with love that felt unpredictable, somewhat desperate, sometimes absent, you might grow into an adult who craves constant reassurance because you never knew love was really safe. If you grew up with love that felt overwhelming, maybe even suffocating, you might grow into an adult who pulls away when things get too close because closeness feels like losing yourself. These patterns don't make someone broken. They make someone human. They make sense given what they've lived. But when they play out in relationships without awareness, they create cycles of misunderstanding. I once worked with a couple who illustrated this perfectly. She longed for more words of affirmation. Tell me you love me. Tell me I matter. And he longed for more ease. Why does everything have to be talked to death? When she didn't get reassurance, she asked for it louder. When he felt pressured, he shut down harder. Each thought the other was the problem, when really the problem was the dance between them. Her anxiety and his avoidance kept triggering each other. And the more they played their parts, the more convinced they became that the relationship was doomed. But here's the thing. Once they could name the pattern, everything shifted. When she felt the panic rise, she could pause and remind herself, this is my old wiring. It doesn't mean he doesn't care. It means I need to breathe before I reach out again. And when he felt the urge to retreat, he could pause and remind himself, this is me instinct to protect myself. But if I disappear, she'll panic more. So maybe I can stay present just a little longer, even if it feels uncomfortable. That's the work, not to erase our wiring, but to recognize it. To catch ourselves in the moment we're about to react automatically and choose something more intentional instead. Because love is not about never feeling anxious or never needing space. It's about learning how to soothe ourselves enough that we don't ask our partner to carry all of our fear. It's about learning how to stay open long enough that we don't make our partner feel abandoned every time we get uncomfortable. It's about learning that we can survive both closeness and distance without losing ourselves. When someone realizes you've lost interest, their reaction will almost always be filtered through this lens. If they lean anxious, they'll protest, they'll reach out, they'll question, they'll plead because they're trying to pull you back in before it's too late. If they lean avoidant, they'll detach. They'll tell themselves they don't need you. They'll bury themselves in independence. They'll build walls because they'd rather feel nothing than risk feeling abandoned. And if they lean secure, they'll probably just ask you directly, "Hey, I'm noticing a shift. What's going on?" Same situation, three very different reactions, and none of them are about right or wrong. They're about survival strategies. They're about the ways each of us has learned to cope with uncertainty. So the question isn't why is she reacting this way? The question is, what does her reaction tell me about the kind of safety she needs? Maybe she needs reassurance that she matters. Maybe she needs space to not feel engulfed. Maybe she needs a direct answer so she can stop guessing. Whatever it is, the reaction makes sentience. You see the story behind it. And if you're the one on the other side, the one whose interest is waning, the most compassionate thing you can do is to respond not with judgment, but with clarity. To not shame someone for being anxious. To not punish someone for needing space. To not drag someone through weeks of guessing when you already know the truth. Because when you meet someone's reaction with honesty, you offer them the one thing their wiring has been craving all along: certainty. The anxious partner doesn't have to hospital if you give them a clear answer. The avoidant partner doesn't have to withdraw if you respect their need for breathing room. The secure partner doesn't have to test or chase because you're already meeting them in the middle. It all comes down to this. Our reactions are shaped by the past, but our choices are made in the present. You didn't have to be doomed by the way you were wired. You can notice the old reflexes, pause, and choose differently. And in that pause, in that 1 second where you say, wait, maybe I don't need to panic. Maybe I don't need to bolt up. Maybe I can stay and listen. That's where intimacy grows. So the next time someone pulls back, or the next time how women try to reattract your attention, feel yourself reacting to the possibility of lost interest, ask yourself, what is this really about? Is this about them, or is this about my wiring? And then ask, what would clarity look like right now? What would honesty sound like right now? What would love choose instead of fear? Because interest comes and goes. Chemistry rises and falls. But the way we respond to each other's fears, that's what builds or breaks a relationship. And the more we can understand that our reactions are shaped not by what's happening in this exact moment, but by every moment that came before it, the more compassion we can bring for ourselves, for each other, for the fragile, messy, beautiful ways we try to stay connected even when connection feels at risk. In the end, that's all any of us are doing. Reacting with the tools we've been given, hoping someone will see past the reaction to the longing underneath, the longing to be chosen, the longing to feel safe, the longing to know that when we reach out or even when we retreat, someone will care enough to stay. When people talk about attraction, they often assume it's about looks or charm or chemistry. But so much of it actually comes down to something subtler: how you carry yourself in moments of uncertainty. The signals you send often without realizing it about your own value and your own self-respect. Because when someone says you've lost interest, their eyes immediately go to the signs you give off in response. Do you crumble? Do you chase? Do you bend yourself into knots to prove you're worth staying for? Or do you hold steady, rooted in your own dignity, even if the other person is wavering? And here's the paradox. The more you try to convince someone of your worth, the less worthy you seem. The more you fight to hold on to a slipping connection, the more it signals that your value is dependent on their attention. And yet, when you can stand tall in the face of rejection, not with arrogance, but with grounded self-respect, it changes the entire dynamic. We all know this intuitively. Think about the times you've seen someone grovel for affection. Maybe it was a friend who kept texting Zomion who clearly wasn't invested. Maybe it was a colleague who kept trying to be included in plans where they weren't wanted. Something about it makes you uncomfortable. Not because they're bad people, but because their desperation reveals a lack of self-belief. It's like watching someone auction off their dignity for scraps of attention. Now, think about the opposite. Think about someone who notices the distance, feels the sting of it, but doesn't collapse. They acknowledge reality. They don't lash out. They don't beg. They don't pretend. They don't care. They just stand in their own worth and quietly let go of what no longer respects them. That's not coldness. It's strength. And it's magnetic because it signals something powerful. I want you, but I don't need you to know who I am. There's a story I'll never forget about a man whose girlfriend began to withdraw. She stopped initiating. Her voice softened into disinterest. Her energy shifted, he noticed, instead of doubling. His efforts, buying flowers, writing long texts, begging for clarity. He simply asked once directly, "It feels like you're somewhere else lately. Is there something I should know?" She hesitated, then admitted she wasn't sure she wanted to continue. And he said calmly, "I care about you, but if your heart isn't in this, I won't fight to keep you here." She was stunned, not because he didn't care, but because he cared without surrendering himself. That response did two things at once. First, it preserved his dignity. Second, it forced her to confront her own ambivalence. Instead of being able to drift away without accountability, she had to decide. And in that moment, she realized she respected him more than she expected. His self-respect made her reconsider her own feelings. That's the irony of status and self-respect signaling. When you don't chase what doesn't want to stay, you actually become more attractive. You show that you're whole, already valuable, and that your worth isn't up for negotiation. And that steadiness, even in the face of rejection, often evokes admiration, even from the person who is pulling away. But this isn't about playing games or using indifference as a weapon. It's not about pretending you didn't care when you do. It's about not collapsing into self-abandonment. It's about holding yourself with quiet authority, even when it hurts, because people can feel the difference between genuine groundedness and a performance of it. Women especially tend to notice these signals not because they're consciously looking for them, but because they're attuned to what your reactions reveal about how you see yourself. If she senses that your identity crumbles without her validation, she may feel powerful for a moment, but over time she'll lose respect. If she senses that you can love her deeply and still stand firm in your boundaries, she feels something different. Trust, because she knows you won't disappear into her, nor will you cling to her out of fear. And this isn't just about romance. It's about life. The way we signal status and self-respect shows up everywhere. It's in how we respond to criticism, how we handle the turning point, acceptance, or chase model rejection, how we act when someone doesn't choose us. Do we fight to prove we belong, or do we trust that our worth is not dependent on external approval? Let me give you an image. Imagine two people at the edge of a cliff. One is dangling by their fingertips, begging to be pulled up, terrified of falling. The other is standing on steady ground. Which one feels more powerful? Which one feels safer to be with? That's the difference self-respect makes. One is desperate for rescue. The other already has solid footing. In relationships, when someone pulls back, it's natural to feel fear. But what you do in that fear makes all the difference. If you grasp, you send the message, "I don't trust my own value without you." If you withdraw completely, pretend you don't care, you send the message, "I'm too afraid to be vulnerable." But if you can stand still, grounded in both your care and your dignity, you send the message, "I see what's happening. I can face it. and I won't betray myself in the process. That steadiness is rare. And because it's rare, it feels like high status, not the shallow kind of status. Cars, money, titles, but the deeper kind. The status of someone who knows who they are and refuses to barter it away. The truth is, interest can be lost for 1,000 reasons. Sometimes it's about you. Sometimes it's about them. Sometimes it's about timing. You can't control that. But you can control how you show up in the face of it. You can choose whether you collapse, whether you retaliate, or whether you hold yourself with quiet strength. And that choice reveals everything about your own relationship with yourself. I often say the real test of character isn't how you behave when someone loves you fully. It's how you behave when somebody hesitates. Do you panic? Do you punish? Or do you stay rooted, kind, and clear? That man is where your true value shines through. Not because the other person validates it, but because you refuse to let their uncertainty define you. And here's the part most people miss. Self-respect is not just for you, it's also for the other person. When you refuse to beg or play games, you're not just protecting your own dignity. You're freeing them from the burden of being responsible. For it, you're saying, I can survive your choice. I will be okay even if you walk away. That clarity is a gift because it takes the relationship out of the realm of manipulation and into the realm of truth. So once a man realizes you've lost interest and they test you by pulling back, by creating ambiguity, by seeing how you'll react, what they're really reading is the signal you send in that moment. Do you crumble or do you stay calm? Do you self-abandon or do you self-respect? That signal tells them more about you than anything you could say with words. And the irony is, the more you stand steady, the more likely they are to come closer again. Not because you manipulated them into it, but because a self-respect is irresistibly compelling. It says, I want connection, but I don't need it to know who I am. And that, more than anything, is what creates lasting respect and love. Because in the end, status isn't about who chases who or who has the upper hand. It's about who can remain true to themselves even when the ground beneath a relationship begins to shake. It's about whose sense of self is so intact that no amount of rejection can erase it. And that kind of quiet, unshakable dignity is the most attractive signal you could ever send. There's a story I love about a lighthouse on a jagged coastline. On clear nights, ships glide by and no one thinks much about the light. But during storms, that steady beam is the difference between course and collision. Relationships work the same way. When the weather is warm, it's easy to feel close. When schedules pile up, when fear creeps in, when novelty settles, that's when your character either shines or disappears. Losing interest isn't a crime. Pretending you have it is where the damage happens. Not because you're Aveline, but because avoidance is seductive. It promises you can skip the hard conversation and keep everyone how to respond without losing self-respect comfortable. But comfort built on confusion is just a loan with predatory interest. Someone pays later, usually both of you. If you are the one drifting, you have two honorable options. Own the ending or own the effort. If you are the one noticing the drift, you have two powerful tools, a clear boundary and a generous heart. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be honest. Here's what honesty sounds like in real life. I care about you and I'm not in a place to offer the consistency you want. I care about you and I'm ready to show up like this. Specific behaviors. I care about myself enough to step away from ambiguity. When a woman realizes you've lost interest, she moves through her sequence. A bid for connection, a data gathering test, a boundary, a shift toward self, and finally a story she can live inside. Some will stay to repair, others will bless the road and keep walking. Both are wise in the right context. The invitation today, right now, is to become the kind of person who makes those steps easier, not harder. Tell the truth early. Keep your word precisely. Apologize without excuses. Let your actions be the loudest words in the room. And if you need one sentence to carry out of this video, let it preface. Choose clarity over chemistry. Chemistry starts the bond. Clarity sustains it. Without clarity, even the most electric spark burns out into static. With clarity, even ordinary days feel safe enough to build a life. So send the text you've been avoiding, or stop sending the text that keeps someone hanging. Make a plan you will keep, or release a plan you won't. Stand in your values. If it's meant to continue, your consistency will make that obvious. If it's meant to end, your kindness will make that bearable. Either way, you'll walk away with your dignity intact and your heart available for what's next. That is how adults love. That is how we grow. And that is how we turn a quiet drift into a clear choice. Take another breath. Pick up the phone. Be brave.